Hello, welcome. My name is Dr. Iwao. I'm a Walden alumnus. Completed my Doctor of Business Administration in 2020, last year. My presentation will be a little bit lengthy, so I'll get started pretty soon. In my research, I studied integration challenges after the cross-border mergers and acquisitions. Ineffective cross-border merger and acquisition strategies can negatively impact value creation. The globally active information and communications technology companies, leaders who do not efficiently manage M&A risks, eventually divestiture of their acquired targets. So through this study, I explored the strategies that leaders of the globally active ICT companies use to integrate diverse workforces following cross-border mergers and acquisitions for the qualitative multiple case study. Next, please. So the problem statement is some ICT companies fail in cross-border M&As after they complete the deals. So ICT companies invest an average of $50 billion on cross-border acquisitions annually, and 40% to 80% of the leaders of acquiring organizations ultimately divest their acquired targets. The general business problem is the leaders of the acquiring organizations are unable to project the impact of mixing different national cultures within the organizations on their business performance. And so the specific business problem is some leaders of ICT companies lack the strategies to integrate diverse workforces following cross-border M&As using the knowledge of different national cultures. Actually, this is a qualitative multiple case study, and its purpose was to explore strategies the leaders of the ICT companies use to integrate diverse workers following the cross-border mergers and acquisitions. And the population of the study comprised of the leaders of ICT companies in what is called the low context cultures in North America or Europe, who worked as managers of companies that have acquired overseas counterparts in higher context cultures in Asia, and mostly in Japan. Those companies have kept operating those acquired targets as part of the mergers for more than 5 years. The significance of the study includes that this study may contribute to a desirable work environment for the workers of an organization that created as a result of cross-border mergers and acquisitions. This study may also be helpful for the leaders of the acquirers to enhance their abilities to integrate the targets to achieve expected business results. So understanding the challenges and solutions to incorporate cultural differences between the acquirers and the targets would enable the managers of the organizations to motivate their diverse workforces to align with the organizational strategies and to reduce the risk of failing to achieve their expected business outcomes. I will come back to the implications of positive social changes later in this presentation, but the theory and conceptual framework I used was two theory concepts. The first one is the Haspesler and Jamison's acquisition integration approach model. And secondly, the Geert Hofstede's 5 dimensions of national cultures theory. Haspesler and Jamison noted that the managers could improve the acquisition's potential by better managing post-acquisition integration processes. In a cross-border mergers and acquisition, different national cultures cause cultural clashes, and the manager of newly created organizations face challenges in achieving the objectives of the acquisition. Along with this acquisition integration approach model, the cultural dimensions theory by Hofstede provided a framework to explore the strategies that the managers use to manage the post-acquisition integrations. Hofstede surveyed 76 countries and scored their national cultures based on 5 dimensions. The findings of Hofstede's research were helpful in analyzing the mentalities behind various behavioral patterns of the workers based on their national cultures of the countries of their origin between the acquirer and the target in a given cross-border acquisition case. Next slide, please. Through the literature review, I found that the challenges of cross-border mergers and acquisitions include the barriers related to emotions that emerge from human interactions. These included national cultures, traits, languages, or business practices, religions, human behaviors, mentalities, or beliefs that are specific to the countries of acquirers and targets. Acquiring firm workers are more rational in making decisions. However, the acquired workers may exhibit rather emotional behaviors. In fact, actually 72% of the executives of multinational corporations focused little on cultures during the integration period. Cross-cultural management is a vital skill for multinational leaders to operate global business because that involves coordinating different values, beliefs, creeds, and customs of the countries. Hofstede developed national cultural theory based on 5 dimensions to explain cross-cultural decision-making differences. That included power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and long-term or short-term orientation. The 5 dimensions of national cultural theory could apply to business operations as well. The first, the power distance. This indicates the level of willingness to accept unequal distributions of power within an organization. People in low power distance cultures would not appreciate unequal power distributions, such as in the United States. However, the workers in high power distance cultures follow the leaders who had aggressive characters or authority. Those are typical countries, those countries found in Asia. Second, uncertainty avoidance. This one refers to how people can accept or cannot accept uncertain information or unstructured situations. A manager in a low uncertainty avoidance culture may tolerate anxieties related to unforeseen futures. And they are more inclined to start new projects, even if they are assessed as high risk. Conversely, managers in high uncertainty avoiding countries may be hesitant to initiate new projects or to change ongoing projects because they may feel dangerous if the results of the projects in the future are uncertain. Third, individualism versus collectivism. This describes the relationship between individuality and the collectivity in a given society. The individualistic people may act in self-interest, whereas collectivistic people tend to belong to groups that care for insiders in exchange for loyalty, and they emphasize responsibility to insiders. So the collectivistic cultures discourage disclosing information to outsiders in general. Group members' influence on decisions might be more stronger in collectivistic cultures than in individualistic cultures. Fourth, the masculinity and femininity. This indicates that whether the people from one group might be more aggressive, competitive, or more modest or caring than the people from another group. Feminine cultures may be a process or consensus oriented and promote sharing information, collaborations, or open climates. By contrast, masculine countries are more aggressive. The people are assertive and driven by competition, and they're oriented on achievement and success. And finally, the fifth dimension is the long-term or short-term orientation. The long-term orientation cultures attach values to future outcomes, and they exhibit higher innovation capacities. But short-term oriented countries emphasize short-term goals, regardless of what may happen in the future, because not immediately achieving the expected outcome would be a status loss. So when long-term oriented manager supervises the short-term oriented workers, the manager may find the performance poorer than expected because the short-term oriented workers tend to finish working when it is done enough. By contrast, the long-term oriented managers may expect employees to complete the jobs no matter how much time taken. So vice versa, when a short-term oriented manager supervises the long-term oriented workers, the manager may feel the workers were wasting time or costs without making much profit. Next slide, please. The research question, again, the research question was what strategies do leaders of ICT companies use to integrate diverse workers after the cross-border M&As? The procedure I used a semi-structured interview using the open-ended questions. I also used a 5-phase thematic analysis, and that's comprised of compiling, disassembling, reassembling, interpreting, and concluding the data collected from the multiple participants to discover patterns and insights or concepts by manipulating the data collected from the interviewees. The participants, I used a purposeful sampling method to choose the participants. I created 3 criteria when selecting them. The participant had supervised, the first criterion is that the participant had supervised multicultural work team for more than 5 years since the organization closed its cross-border M&A or started international business operations under joint venture or partnerships. Second, the participants' organizations has been recording positive returns on investment since the organization closed its M&A deal. And finally, the third criterion is that the organizations involved in cross-border M&As originated from the countries that were culturally distant based on Hofstede's National Cultural Index. To identify the organizations and potential interview participants, I used global database such as the Thomson Reuters, Aecon, Crunchbase, or PitchBook. Also the LinkedIn and Facebooks as well. At the time I found my data collection saturated, I had accessed 8 business executives from the United States, Canada, France, and Norway in the study. These business people had experiences in integrating diverse workers of the ICT companies that met my 3 criteria. Well, to analyze the data, I developed codes and themes from multiple lines of evidence, including field notes and complementary sources of information from participant observations, interview responses, and so on. Then I performed a pattern analysis using in vivo and stepped through the 5 phases I discussed before. That's compiling, disassembling, reassembling, interpreting, and concluding the data. The conceptual framework that helped me to analyze the themes to find similarities and commonalities and the patterns arising from the collected data. And finally, I used methodological triangulation by using multiple data collection methods involving various data sources, and lastly, performed member checking as well. Next slide, please. The results and findings included, after analyzing the participant responses, I have ultimately generated a total of 53 codes I then finally categorized them into 3 themes. This included workplace transparencies, business practices and working styles, and communication styles. And under each of these themes, the codes were further grouped into 2 to 4 sub-themes. And those are outlined in the table shown in the slide. It's a little bit small characters. I'm really sorry about that. Based on the nature of the issues and similarities, so I will now elaborate on them in this section of the slide. The first, the challenge number 1. It's the participants actually expressed the difficulty in handling conflicts caused by different perceptions about information sharing between the workers of acquirer and targets. Information sharing is a vital factor during the integration phase, and is an essential process for an organization to create synergies and accelerate innovations. So, in general, the American workers are communicative and open. But by contrast, the Japanese workers are more hesitant in sharing information because Japan is more masculine than the United States, and it's more collectivist cultures as well. Some participants noted that the information is viewed as a power or a weapon in Japan. So the one who has the information is the most powerful person in a Japanese organization. Workers in a masculine and high power distance and collectivistic cultures may display closeness towards revealing information and less team collaborations, because the high levels of assertiveness might encourage competition against each other. Also, collectivistic workers emphasize responsibility to insiders as opposed to people outside, which makes the Japanese workers tend to disclose less information to outsiders. This was a challenge for American managers. By contrast, workers in low power distance cultures, they show better team collaborations and trust in fellow team members, regardless of their social status. The challenge number 2, the participants also mentioned that another type of conflict caused by different levels of rivalry between the people from different cultures. Internal rivalry can improve the quality of the workers' performance. However, the rivalry can also impede information sharing behavior and synergy creations in some cases. Moderating interpersonal rivalry between the workers may be vital when integrating acquired workers coming from highly masculine cultures into an organization in a relatively feminine culture. Again, the Japanese workers were more aggressive and more proud of winning the competitions comparing with the US workers. The ideas that winning is important is more pronounced in masculine cultures, as I mentioned. So that Japanese workers appear to be obsessed to be the best in delivering services and products. Participants noted they won't ask for help when working. By contrast, American employees would not hesitate to ask for help when necessary. Compared to the Japanese workers, the US workers were not necessarily ambitious in taking pride in demonstrating to be the best. Challenge number 3, acquired workers in a high context culture display mixed emotions toward new managers and colleagues. Some participants expressed difficulty in dealing with collectivistic workers. Their criticism and gossips that's going on in the background against acquirers, managers. Transparency is a key to enhancing team performance and collaborations. Nevertheless, forcing the workers to practice openness without understanding their traits and values may cause workers stress. And that may lead to poor team performance as well. So the solutions to these problems, participants provided workers with educational programs to promote cross-cultural understanding to reduce the risk of cross-border business failures. An Organizations should offer training programs for some cross-cultural intelligence to meet the increasing demand for international talent and reduce the risk of cross-border business failures. Through the program, the participants, for example, convinced the acquired workers that they could work and ask colleagues for help. Secondly, managers supervising the workers in high power distance cultures and masculine cultures, they frankly exchanged views on their own cultural differences explicitly when they initiated collaborations. Misunderstanding the nuance of open communication may provoke process conflicts and between the culturally different workers. Solution number 3. Participants also noted the cross-functional teams approach was highly effective if you involve various employees from employees and managers at different levels from acquirers and targets. Actually, today, more than 70% of ICT companies use cross-functional teams approach as an effective way to organize work teams and execute their international projects. Both the acquirer and target need to mutually understand respective national cultures, so that they can align with new organizational strategies. Participants also mandated the employees to participate in cross-functional teams to stimulate the sharing of knowledge. Solution number 4, participants conducted intra-organization worker exchange to train selected acquired employees to make them liaisons to bridge communications between the acquirer and the targets. Having some liaisons might be helpful, especially in high power distance cultures that were the people who are overly concerned with hierarchies when communicating with an acquirer in a low power distance cultures. To align the rest of the acquired employees, managers provided the liaisons with authoritative powers when after they finished the exchange program and they returned to their targets. When a manager from an individualistic culture managed to work team in a collectivistic culture, the team performance might be low if the level of trust among teammates was low. Participants also emphasized that honest conversations could maintain trust with acquired workers in a masculine and collectivistic culture. Number 5, when the acquired workers make background criticism against the managers, the manager has to be humble and understand the pain that the acquired workers might be feeling. Humility and honesty often reconcile potential criticism and gossips among the acquired workers in a collectivistic and highly power distance cultures. And again, the honest and upfront conversation will be essential in high power distance cultures because the workers avoided direct questioning in authority and often led to poor performance. Trust with people in a different culture evolves through repeated interactions because relationships can mature with interactions frequently. And duration and a variety of challenges that partners face together. Theme number 2, regarding the business practice and the working styles. The managers of acquiring firms often encounter challenges arising from the different business processes and the work styles in the host countries. Difficulties in business practices can contain both positive and negative impacts on international business collaborations. If the managers does not recognize the target's cultural business practices, and if that happens, tensions may arise between the manager and the acquired workers. Business cycles, the challenge number 1 regarding the business cycles. In a workplace that is comprised of people from long-term oriented countries and short-term oriented countries, the conflicts in the business cycles may happen. In many Asian countries such as China, Korea, Taiwan, or Japan, the workers typically plan business strategies on a 3 to 5 or perhaps 5 to 10 year span. However, the business people in Western countries such as the United States, or Canada, Australia, usually review their activities on a quarterly basis. The executives in North America are usually obliged to report the financials to the shareholders every quarter. So the managers in the United States are keen on whether or not the current activities and decisions may result in a relatively quick payoffs or not. However, the short-term tactics, positive earnings management, that implies short-term oriented managers tend to restrict research and development expenses compared to long-term oriented Asian managers. Conversely, the workers in Asia relatively value future growth potentials and focus more on long-term goals rather than immediate results. So the long-term oriented managers also appreciate the efforts to develop innovation capacities by supporting the workers to invest their time in achieving long-term success in the future. So that sacrifices the short-term results. The second challenge within this theme is the task-oriented versus process-oriented. The participants also noted the disagreements between the individualistic and collectivistic workers regarding the different views on how tasks should be handled and how many tasks to be handled. If a manager prioritized task-based integration and paid less attention to understanding the different processes to handle tasks, the acquired employees might develop negative emotions against the manager by stemming anger and insecurity in the organization. To achieve unity in a diverse workforce and improve team performance, it is important to examine the potential conflicts in process and reduce the worker stress. Workers in short-term oriented individualist cultures often perceive the workers in long-term oriented and collectivistic societies are wasting time and wasting costs to complete the tasks without making much progress in a short period. Let's suppose, for example, the Japanese employees typically created task lists and focused on how they were evaluated based on how long they stayed in the office and engaged in each item on the task list. The Japanese workers rarely expressed concerns about how efficiently they could achieve their jobs. By contrast, the workers in the United States, performance is not measured based on that, how much time they spend on the tasks, but people are more process-oriented and concerned with how quickly and effectively they can handle the tasks. Disagreements among team members on how tasks should be achieved can cause consistently negative impacts on team performance. The conflicts in process may also lead to decreasing each individual's effectiveness when connecting ideas from different cultures. They may trigger miscommunications among the team members as well. The third challenge on this theme is the relationship conflicts. Some participants raised the issues of complexity in maintaining interpersonal relationships between the workers of the acquirers and targets. This is associated with different levels of masculinity and long-term or short-term orientation cultural traits. When integrating the long-term oriented workers, a short-term oriented manager may need to change the mindset and focus on building positive relationships with the acquired workers to motivate them in the workplace. Because the workers in long-term oriented culture appreciate human relationships over tasks. The long-term oriented workers wish to build favorable relationships with new executives from the acquiring firms. The new executives can decide the workers' future lives by creating a rapport beforehand. The long-term oriented business people try to avoid potential relationship conflicts connected to emotional and personal incompatibilities that may cause anger, frustration, suspicion, or distrust, or hostility among team members in the later stage. However, the short-term oriented managers would seek quicker profits and results from the workers, but they may pay less attention to creating relationships with them. That being said, relationship building is challenging for most of the North American managers. This takes time and it requires to give up. You have to actually, the managers are required to give up normal life, the practice in the United States. Even the Japanese workers would usually spend more than 1 year until they become able to interact frankly with US colleagues. So all of the US workers expect the Japanese to speak to each other in an equal stance from the beginning, but that's also difficult for the Japanese people to practice. So the solutions to these problems, the data-driven discussions, the discussions based on rationals could allow management to select more valuable alternatives and define the project's criteria to work better. Participants practiced data-driven communications with acquired workers to highlight the return on investment that the acquirers were expected to achieve over a certain period and convince the shareholders. They took out all emotions and uncertain anxieties from the discussions. So communications with acquired Japanese employees who are highly uncertainty avoiding characters that involve helping them to understand the rationales behind the projects. To make acquired workers attentive to work efficiencies, participants implemented programs to train acquired workers to utilize available systems, tools, or computer tools or other existing functions to improve productivity and to accelerate the pace they worked. They sent some supervisors from the acquirer side to targets to conduct training programs. They helped acquired workers become more efficient and communicate, and deliver at the pace the acquirers expected. Participants developed strategies to maintain rapport with acquired workers and attempted to reduce worker stress and emotional exhaustion resulting from relationship conflicts. Participants were very humble when initiating relationship with acquired workers in a long-term oriented cultures. Actually, maintaining the target's cultures was essential for the participants to minimize conflicts with workers from targets. So acknowledging differences is important. Changing acquired workers' behavior was not easy. This is the one participant said that that's a DNA level issue. Some participants commented that they always needed to judge how to compromise the difference so that they could maximize the hybrid team's performance rather than force them to change. Providing acquired workers with some degrees of autonomy could help motivate the workers and create values. The participants also suggested the acquired workers to apply mental filtering techniques to reduce potential relationship conflicts that could arise from emotional incompatibilities among team members. So when executives or when workers from high power distance cultures speak something boastfully, the workers from the low power distance workers should ignore bragging phrases or words and grasp only the essential words from the speech. So this mental filter technique might be a helpful skill to reduce potential relationship conflicts because the relationship conflicts could be triggered by various emotions and personal feelings against each other. The theme number 3 regarding the communication styles. Participants identified 2 types of barriers that hindered open communications for the acquired workers in relatively high power distance cultures. The people in high power distance cultures were overly concerned with organizational hierarchies. Some participants pointed out a challenge emerged from different levels of detail in communications with the workers of highly uncertainty avoiding cultures. The first challenge in this theme is the keen awareness of hierarchies. Managers share challenges often associated with tacit communications practiced by the workers in high power distance cultures. Tacit communications can often cause miscommunications in the workplace, delays in work progress, and slow decisions. In Japan, a less senior staff from Japan usually did not speak in the meeting. The most senior person typically kept talking during the meeting and even dominated the conversation from the Japanese side. The subordinates in the high power distance cultures would not speak proactively when their managers is present. They would allow the managers to keep talking and controlling conversations, even if they anticipate the outcome of the discussions might be a conflict with their interest. But by contrast, in a US organization, when the CEO and junior employees join a meeting with people from another organization, those junior employees would also speak as much as the CEO would speak. The US employees may usually assume the meetings will progress as an open conversation about the assignments or projects. However, the Japanese managers may have a different scenario in mind, expecting the American workers to just keep listening the directions to follow. The second challenge in this theme is the detail level of the information exchanged. Miscommunications may result in distrust among diverse stakeholders because that impedes the adequate flow of information and knowledge exchange across the team in an organization. Acquired workers in Japan often ask their managers for clear and too detailed directions when they work on projects, while the managers in the United States want to give some freedom to the employees to think about how they wish to accomplish the tasks instead of giving precise, long instructions on how the work should be done. Highly uncertainty avoiding workers often ask questions repeatedly to confirm their understandings. The challenges in responding to repetitive questions from acquired workers in highly uncertainty avoiding cultures cause delays in decisions and starting new joint projects. So the slow decisions were problematic for semiconductor companies in ICT industry because the industry is so highly dynamic and quite fast growing. For the solutions to these problems were to foster open conversations between the acquirer and targets. Both managers and subordinates should be educated on the cultural nuances. Participants conducted a mentorship program and intercompany worker exchange to address uncertainty avoiding behavior of the high uncertainty avoiding cultures. So managers of acquirer and target should live in the reciprocal countries for some periods and build positive relationships with local workers and stakeholders to adapt to the local cultures. After this exercise, the managers from both organizations became the liaisons who could bridge communications between the acquirer and the target. Some participants also provided the acquired workers with mentors. The mentors were appointed from the acquirer's side and answered questions and helped new staff understand the acquirer's decision-making process. In an informal meeting, the acquired workers and the mentors built trust, and they could freely discuss how things should be done in an environment while senior management was not present. The success of joint business operations relies on relationships between the two organizations, which the liaisons and mentors can maintain using their skills to interact between two nationalities. Next slide, please. So acknowledging compromising the differences in national cultures, the workers were critical behaviors that an integration leaders would need to support. So the time's really going fast. So I have to talk about the limitations of this work. I used the purposeful sampling, from the beginning, I did not know the range of variations in the sample from the beginning. And the participants might also have biases and provide only publicly pleasing, politically correct feedback instead of honest opinions during the interviews. I also required participants to consent orally to record their interviews. This might have some caused some participants to withhold information for privacy reasons. The participants might also have affected the accuracy and reliability of the study findings if they did not have sufficient knowledge of Hofstede's 5 dimensions of national cultures. And finally, although the conceptual framework I used was probably appropriate to analyze the data, but those conceptual framework might have had weaknesses as well. The recommendations for this study to achieve creating values following cross-border mergers and acquisitions, the business leaders should start building relationships with acquired workers before attempting to make any significant movements. So the times really was short. So I will stop my presentation here, and I will, for the rest of the 2 minutes, I want to make myself open for any questions if there are any.
Excellent. Thank you for that great presentation. Feel free to type in your questions into the chat. We do have one already from Christina, which I'll summarize here. In the power distance dimension, in some cultures, subordinates accept the power distance because there is a different responsibility that the leaders have towards the subordinate, and the subordinates expect leaders to meet those responsibilities. Do you think that misinterpreting subordination without taking into account cultural expectations? Also, some cultural management power brokers are interested in maintaining stereotypes, so they maintain their status as brokers, such as let me handle it, or it's difficult for them to understand. Would executive training and perhaps, as you mentioned, transparency also help in this regard, allowing the flow of the best values between the cultures?
No, sorry. Oh, sorry, I could not catch the question.
Christina, would you want to unmute and clarify your question?
Sure. I was wondering if understanding very superficially the power distance in different cultures could lead to misunderstanding and conflict. For example, some cultures submit to subordination because there is subordinates have an expectation of the responsibility of leaders, and they have expectations of being taken care of. And so do you think that misunderstanding just the power distance, just when it eventually could impact these misunderstanding?
The power distance problem may lead to misunderstanding of the kind of the strength of the instructions. The managers might instruct the subordinates. If you are the workers from the high power distance countries, you might feel the instructions are absolute and that had to be followed precisely as instructed. So but the managers may not always, expecting that way. Just please work on this project efficiently, immediately. Please start immediately. But that doesn't actually, specify the time or length. It's kind of that lead to misunderstanding and poor performance if the work is reacted something overly. So yeah, that's a kind of that things might happen.
Okay, and also I wanted to ask you, there in these cases, sometimes cultural management power brokers emerge. Like, I know the culture, especially at higher levels, and then they are interested in maintaining their position as power brokers. So how do you remedy this issue? They maintain stereotypes so that they can continue in this position of power brokers. Did you see any of these, or how can these mediators be assessed by leadership?
And the leadership, in this case, it's a cross-border mergers and acquisitions cases. And the one thing that the person who had the power, the problem, they used the mental filtering techniques to just to ignore the things that's really not really, essential of the conversation, let's say conversation, and just would take the kind of most important part of the discussions from the person who has more powers and kind of person who has different power distributions. Anyway, it's always more important for the person to be able to build relationships in a favorable manner, so that the techniques for that creates the kind of favorable relationships would work. That's the feelings and kind of the opinions that came out of the participants of this study.
Excellent, thank you. In the interest of time, we do need to start wrapping up, but thank you for such a great presentation. Thank you everyone for attending and joining us today.